Hey there folks, Wrel here. Today we'll be reviewing the Betelgeuse Directive LMG for the Vanu Sovereignty. We'll talk about how it stacks up against the default Orion, and how to use it effectively. The Betelgeuse is the directive reward for getting an Araxium medal on 5 LMGs. I personally recommend doing that on the default Orion, the SVA-88, the Pulsar LSW, the Polaris, and the NS-15M, all of which are really easy to do well with. The Flare and the Ursa take a little bit more finesse to use well, but they're completely viable options depending on your playstyle. Both the Orion and the Betelgeuse deal 143 damage out to 10 meters and 125 damage at 65 meters. This means a 7 body shot kill until 10 meters, an 8 body shot kill anywhere beyond that, and a 4 headshot kill at all ranges. Both weapons fire at 750 rounds per minute or 12.5 rounds per second, which means a super quick time to kill of 0.48 seconds until 10 meters, 0.64 seconds beyond 10 meters, and 0.24 seconds with a 4 headshot kill. The projectile velocity is 540, which isn't horrible for close-to-close mid-range combat, but you'll feel it any further than that. The big feature of the Betelgeuse is that it uses a heat mechanic. All of the testing here is done by breaking down footage, so some of the numbers may just be a tad bit off past the decimals, but it'll be close enough to give you a good idea of the strengths and weaknesses of this mechanic. So for heat mechanics, you can't reload this weapon, but you get infinite ammo. You will overheat the weapon at 49 or 50 shots, which is essentially the magazine size. If you overheat the weapon, there's about a 3.2 second delay before the weapon starts cooling off. Then it cools off completely over roughly 4 seconds. Combine the two numbers and this is essentially your long reload of 7.2 seconds. So super punishing if you happen to overheat the weapon. If you don't overheat the weapon, meaning that you fire 48 shots or less, there will be around a 0.5 second delay, and then the weapon will start cooling down. So from 48 shots, it'll cool down over 3.85 seconds, meaning that your short reload is essentially a 0.5 second delay, plus about 0.08 seconds for each shot you fire. So at 48 shots, let's pretend that you're going to pull off a perfect short reload. That's 4.35 seconds total for a 48 round magazine. That's a pretty long time for a reload like this. If you compare that to the Orion's short and long reload, which is 3 seconds short and 3.44 seconds long for a 50 round magazine, the Orion has a pretty sizable advantage when talking about time and time alone. But the Betelgeuse doesn't need to reload, meaning that unless you overheat the weapon, or are about to overheat the weapon, you're never really put in a position where you need to have that sort of downtime, meaning that you aren't vulnerable for those 3 seconds that you would normally be with an Orion. So remember that the punishment for overheating the weapon is really bad, but a massive advantage of the weapon is that it also cools off while it's not equipped, meaning that if you overheat your weapon, you can pull out your pistol, you can pull out your rocket launcher or your medkit, and then come back to the weapon a little bit later and it'll be primed and ready to go. What's kind of interesting is that the weapon didn't used to work like this. Back when you used to be able to manually reload the weapon, which the Eclipse still does, if you used up all your magazine, the weapon would overheat, and if it overheated, it would stay overheated, regardless of what you switched to. This would force you to reload it, which I think was a much more fair punishment for not managing your heat properly. Even so, it's really difficult to overheat this weapon. In the background, you're going to see me do it, and it's one of the few times that I've done it since the weapon was changed in late October, and that's because there were just so many free kills sitting there that I just got excited, and I wasn't paying attention. Also, note the guy next to me who actually waits for the concussion grenade to go off before he starts firing. Good man, he gets bonus points. In most situations though, you won't have to worry too much about overheating the weapon, because if you wait half a second, the weapon starts to cool down, and every second after that, you're putting a little over 12 rounds right back into your magazine. The Betelgeuse, just like the Orion, used to have a 0.75 times movement speed multiplier while aiming down sights. This was recently removed, and the cone-of-fire and recoil characteristics were tightened up instead. From a recoil perspective, the Betelgeuse and the Orion both kick straight up. Keep in mind though that the Orion also has access to a forward grip, whereas the Betelgeuse does not. So the more accurate of the two will always be the Orion, if only by a small margin. And I've listed the forward grip values for the Orion in parentheses if you're interested. As far as cone of fire goes, the Betelgeuse and the Orion both have the same. They also have a lower than average aim down sights cone of fire bloom when compared to most other weapons. For this damage model, it's usually a 0.05 bloom while aiming down sights, but when you compare the Orion to the MSWR's aim down sights moving cone of fire starts out at 0.35, whereas the Orion's starts out at 0.4. This means that the MSWR, which is basically the TR's equivalent of the Orion, has a bloom advantage until the 6th shot, where the Orion takes the lead due to lower bloom. Beyond that, the Betelgeuse and Orion's hipfire is better than average while moving, but the Orion can also equip a laser sight to further tighten up the hipfire, while the Betelgeuse cannot. The MSWR and Anchor both have access to advanced lasers, but they also start out with slightly worse hipfire cone of fires by default. So if you equip a standard laser on the Orion and an advanced laser on the MSWR or Anchor, their hipfires will be about the same. So all in all, when you look at the Betelgeuse, it's basically a slightly less accurate Orion with infinite ammo. And the reason that you'd want to use the Orion over the Betelgeuse would really be damage output due to either equipping a forward grip or a laser sight, because better accuracy means more shots on target, which means dead bad guys. However, the Betelgeuse, if you can control it and you don't fire in long bursts, you don't waste a lot of ammo, it's probably the best infantry primary in the game for farming. Not having to reload means that anytime you're not firing, you're putting bullets right back into the magazine. That's a very powerful feature from a sustainability perspective, and it allows you to move from one fight to the next with very little downtime. Tips for using both the Betelgeuse and the Orion are as follows. Burst in 3 to 6 shots and aim for the head. Since the vertical recoil is straight up without a jarring rate of fire, you just need to pull down on the mouse to compensate. Don't be afraid to hip fire as well. The Betelgeuse can't equip a laser sight, but the hipfire is still pretty workable when you're up close. Also, try to fight within about 30 meters or less. You can harass targets beyond that, but your time to kill slows by a pretty hefty margin, and more importantly, you'll be wasting a lot of shots, which leads to the weapon overheating. You want to keep the Betelgeuse from overheating by firing at targets that you can actually kill. This isn't a sustained fire weapon like the Polaris, the SVA-88, or the Pulsar LSW. You can't just throw bullets around without punishing yourself in the process, so try to keep the heat low. But if you do end up overheating the weapon, remember to switch to your secondary or medkit or a rocket launcher, because the weapon will cool off when it's not equipped. All in all, if you're considering grinding out the Betelgeuse, it's definitely worth it. The weapon is great fun to use, and managing heat instead of a reload actually seems to help make you a better player overall, since you're bursting more and shooting at only what you think you can hit, because if you don't, you screw yourself over. Improvement by punishment, not too bad. If this video has been interesting, helpful, or entertaining, please feel free to like, subscribe, tell your friends about the channel, and if you have any thoughts on the Betelgeuse directive weapon, or if there's another directive weapon that you'd like to see me review in the future, you can go ahead and leave those thoughts in the comment section down below. Thanks very much, folks. Wrel signing off.
I'll get you fixed up. I am in your debt.